The telephone rang at 7:30 on the morning of June 6, 1944. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, Commander-in-Chief West, picked up the receiver and heard what he had been dreading for months. Allied forces were landing in Normandy. Thousands of paratroopers had dropped inland. Naval bombardment had begun. The invasion was happening now. Von Rundstedt understood military mathematics with the clarity that came from 5 decades of service. The panzer divisions held in reserve near Paris were approximately 120 miles from the Norman coast. If they moved immediately, they could reach the beaches by late afternoon. The Allies would still be consolidating their positions, still vulnerable, still dependent on supplies coming across the beaches rather than through captured ports. But the panzer divisions represented Germany's only operational reserve in the West. Committing them meant the die was cast. If they failed, if they were destroyed attacking the beachhead, nothing stood between the Allies and Paris. Nothing protected the road to Germany itself. This was the terrible calculus facing every German commander on June 6th. Every decision carried existential consequences, and the authority to make those decisions rested not with the field commanders who understood the situation, but with Adolf Hitler, hundreds of miles away in Bavaria, asleep. The command structure guaranteed failure. Von Rundstedt commanded the Western Theatre, but could not move major units without permission from OKW, the Armed Forces High Command, which meant Hitler. Rommel commanded Army Group B but answered to von Rundstedt for some decisions and directly to Hitler for others. The panzer divisions belonged to Panzer Group West, commanded by General Leo Geyer von Schweppenberg, who disagreed with both Rommel and von Rundstedt about how to employ armour. 3 brilliant commanders, each with valid strategic insights, each with a piece of operational authority, none with the power to make unified decisions. It was a system designed to fail. Von Rundstedt's response was immediate and correct. He ordered 2 panzer divisions held in reserve near Paris to move immediately toward the Norman coast. The divisions could reach the beaches in hours. They could counterattack before the Allies established a secure foothold. They could drive the invaders back into the sea. But within minutes, the old field marshal received a second call. His orders were cancelled. The panzer divisions were under the direct control of the Führer. Only Adolf Hitler could authorize their movement. And Adolf Hitler was asleep, the man who would decide the fate of Europe, the man who controlled Germany's only hope of repelling the invasion, had gone to bed at 3 in the morning after entertaining propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels. He would not wake until noon, and when he finally did wake, he would make the single worst decision of his military career. He would declare that Normandy was a feint, a diversion, and that the real invasion would come at Pas-de-Calais. The mathematics of June 6, 1944, tell a story of systematic German failure so complete, so catastrophic, that it borders on the incomprehensible. 156,000 Allied troops landed on French soil in 24 hours. Not in a week, not in a month, in a single day. And the German response, the vaunted Wehrmacht that had conquered Europe, managed to launch exactly 1 armoured counterattack. 1. This is not a story about Allied brilliance, though brilliance was certainly present. This is a story about German paralysis, about a command structure so dysfunctional, so infected by political interference and personal animosity, that it could not respond effectively to the most predictable military crisis of the war. The Allies had been massing troops in England for over a year. Everyone knew an invasion was coming. The only questions were when and where. And, yet when it came, the Germans were caught completely unprepared. The scale of Allied preparation was staggering. and German intelligence had captured only fragments of the true picture. By May of 1944, over 2.8 million Allied troops had massed in southern England. The British Isles had been transformed into what General Dwight D. Eisenhower called the greatest operating military base of all time. 7 million tons of supplies had been shipped across the Atlantic, 450,000 tons of ammunition, over 5,000 ships had been assembled for the invasion fleet. 11,000 aircraft had been assigned to Operation Overlord. The Americans alone had sent 1.4 million soldiers to England, overwhelming the British transportation system, filling every available barracks, camping in fields, sleeping in requisitioned country estates. German reconnaissance aircraft, the few that could penetrate Allied air defences, photographed endless rows of landing craft in British ports. German agents, most of whom were actually double agents working for British intelligence, sent reports of troop concentrations. German radar stations along the French coast tracked the massive increase in Allied air activity. All of this intelligence pointed to one inescapable conclusion: a massive invasion was imminent. And yet, the German High Command could not agree on where it would come or how to respond to it. The paralysis was not from lack of information. It was from an inability to make decisive strategic choices in a command structure poisoned by personal rivalries and Hitler's increasingly erratic interference. The story of Germany's catastrophic failure at Normandy begins not on June 6th, but months earlier, in the bitter strategic disagreements between two of Germany's most respected field marshals. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel arrived in France in November of 1943 with a reputation forged in the deserts of North Africa, the Desert Fox, the master of mobile warfare, the general who had brought the British to the edge of defeat at Tobruk. Hitler had given him a simple mission: inspect the Atlantic Wall, Germany's supposedly impregnable chain of fortifications stretching from Norway to Spain, and prepare to defeat the coming Allied invasion. What Rommel found horrified him. The Atlantic Wall was a fiction. Oh, the bunkers existed. The gun emplacements were real enough. Hitler had ordered the construction of 15,000 permanent fortifications to defend against invasion. By the time Rommel arrived, only 8,000 had been completed, and most of those were concentrated in the wrong places. The German High Command, including Rommel's superior, Field Marshal von Rundstedt, believed the invasion would come at Pas-de-Calais, the narrowest point of the English Channel. It was the obvious choice. Only 21 miles of water separated England from France at Calais. Allied bombers and fighters could provide continuous cover. The distance was short enough that landing craft could make multiple trips in a single day. So the Germans had concentrated their best fortifications at Calais. Massive concrete bunkers housing naval guns capable of hitting ships miles offshore. Interconnected trenches and machine gun nests covering every approach. Minefields so dense that engineers estimated 4 million mines had been planted in the Calais sector alone. But Rommel was not convinced. He had spent time studying aerial photographs and intelligence reports. He believed the Allies might land elsewhere, perhaps Normandy, perhaps the Cotentin Peninsula, perhaps anywhere along hundreds of miles of coastline that remained weakly defended. More fundamentally, Rommel understood something that most of the German High Command did not. Allied air power had changed everything. Rommel had experienced Allied air superiority firsthand in North Africa. He had watched as Spitfires and Hurricanes systematically destroyed his supply lines. He had seen what happened when German armoured columns tried to move in daylight under clear skies. they were slaughtered. This shaped Rommel's entire defensive philosophy. The invasion, he argued, had to be stopped on the beaches, immediately, before the Allies could establish a foothold, before they could bring ashore the tanks and artillery that would make dislodging them impossible. To accomplish this, Rommel demanded that Germany's panzer divisions, the elite armoured formations that remained the Wehrmacht's most potent offensive weapon, be stationed as close to the coast as possible. When the invasion came, they would counterattack instantly, driving into the landing forces while they were still disorganized, still vulnerable, still exposed to the guns of the Atlantic Wall. Field Marshal von Rundstedt disagreed completely. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Von Rundstedt was a traditional officer of the old school. 70 years old in 1944, he had served in the Kaiser's army during World War I. He believed in orthodox military doctrine, defense in depth, mobile reserves, concentration of force at the decisive point. From von Rundstedt's perspective, Rommel's plan was madness. Stationing panzer divisions near the coast made them vulnerable to naval gunfire. The massive guns of Allied battleships could destroy tanks from miles away, as they had done during the landings at Salerno in Italy. Far better to hold the armour back, away from the coast, concentrated in a central reserve. When the main Allied landing came, wherever it came, the panzers would move forward en masse and crush the invaders in a devastating counterattack. The strategic disagreement was more than academic. It reflected two fundamentally incompatible visions of how to fight the coming battle. And both men believed correctly that the fate of Germany hung on who was right. Hitler's solution satisfied no one. He compromised. Each army group would receive 3 panzer divisions to deploy as they wished. 4 divisions would remain in a central reserve. But these 4 critical divisions would be under Hitler's personal control. They could not move without his direct authorization. In trying to placate both commanders, Hitler had created a command structure that guaranteed paralysis. When the invasion came, the forward panzer divisions would be too few to stop it. The reserve divisions would be too far away to intervene quickly, and any decision to commit them would require navigating the labyrinthine command structure of the Third Reich, where fear of the Führer's displeasure often outweighed military necessity. While the German generals argued about panzers, Rommel threw himself into the only task he could control, strengthening the Atlantic Wall. Under Rommel's relentless supervision, the pace of construction accelerated dramatically. In the first 4 months of 1944, German engineers built over 4,600 new fortifications along the Atlantic coast. That matched the construction rate of the entire previous year. Rommel personally designed many of the beach obstacles that would greet the invaders. Wooden posts topped with telemines, explosive devices that would detonate when struck by a landing craft's hull, concrete tetrahedra, pyramid-shaped obstacles designed to rip the bottoms out of boats, steel hedgehogs, twisted assemblies of railway track that could tear through armour plate, Czech hedgehogs, simple X-shaped steel frames that blocked tanks. By June of 1944, over 500,000 obstacles had been planted on the beaches and in the shallow waters offshore. In Normandy alone, 6 million mines had been laid. Fields behind the beaches were filled with Rommelspargel, Rommel's asparagus, tall wooden stakes designed to impale gliders attempting to land. Low-lying areas were deliberately flooded to create impassable marshes. The construction consumed enormous resources. The organization TOT, the Nazi engineering corps responsible for fortification work, employed over 1.4 million workers. Most were not German. They were French civilians drafted into forced labor, or prisoners of war, or slave laborers from concentration camps. They poured millions of cubic meters of concrete. They installed thousands of artillery pieces in reinforced bunkers with walls 3.5 meters thick enough to withstand direct hits from battleship shells. And yet, for all this frantic effort, Rommel knew the truth. The Atlantic Wall was incomplete. It would always be incomplete. Germany simply did not have the resources to fortify every mile of coastline to the standard Rommel deemed necessary. In his diary, Rommel wrote with uncharacteristic pessimism, "The war will be won or lost on the beaches. We'll have only one chance to stop the enemy, and that's while he's in the water, struggling to get ashore. The first 24 hours of the invasion will be decisive. For the Allies, as well as Germany, it will be the longest day." Rommel was right. But he would not be there to see it. On June 4th, 1944, weather reports indicated that the English Channel would experience severe storms over the following week. Winds up to 30 miles per hour, rain, rough seas, conditions that made amphibious operations impossible. Rommel made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He drove to Germany to spend a day with his wife Lucy. It was her birthday, and besides, the weather made an invasion impossible. The Allies wouldn't come in a storm. Rommel wasn't the only senior German commander who judged the weather too poor for invasion. General Friedrich Dollmann, commander of the 7th Army defending Normandy, scheduled a command post exercise for June 6th, a war game, a tabletop simulation of how to respond to an Allied landing. His division commanders were ordered to Rennes, miles from their headquarters, to participate. General Wilhelm Falley, commanding the 91st Air Landing Division, was driving to Rennes when the invasion began. He heard the roar of thousands of aircraft engines overhead. He ordered his driver to turn around and race back to headquarters. As his car pulled onto the grounds, American paratroopers of the 82nd Airborne Division opened fire. Falley became the first German general to die in Normandy. The Allies had not waited for good weather. They had launched the largest amphibious invasion in history into a storm. At 1:15 in the morning on June 6th, German radar stations along the Norman coast began detecting massive formations of aircraft approaching from England. Within minutes, reports flooded into Army headquarters. Paratroopers were landing inland. Thousands of them. Around the base of the Cotentin Peninsula, east of the Orne River, cutting roads, seizing bridges, destroying communications lines. At first, the reports seemed impossible to believe. Paratroopers in a storm? In darkness? In winds that would scatter them across the countryside? It had to be a mistake. Or a diversion. Or dummy troops. The Allies were known to drop mannequins equipped with pyrotechnics to simulate parachute landings and confuse German defences. But the reports kept coming. And they were not about mannequins. British airborne troops seized the bridges over the Quéant Canal and the Orne River intact. American paratroopers of the 101st Airborne Division landed in flooded marshland behind Utah Beach. Many drowned, weighed down by equipment. Others landed scattered across miles of countryside, lost, disoriented, but gathering into small groups and moving toward their objectives. At 6:30 in the morning, just as dawn broke over the Norman coast, the naval bombardment began. German soldiers in the coastal fortifications had never experienced anything like it. Over 5,000 Allied ships filled the horizon. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers, all firing simultaneously. The sound was beyond description. A continuous rolling thunder that shook the ground, shattered windows miles inland, and made speech impossible. 14-inch shells from battleships struck concrete bunkers with the force of earthquakes. Smaller ships poured thousands of rounds onto the beaches, onto the bluffs behind the beaches, onto any position that might hold German troops. The bombardment was supposed to destroy the defences. In practice, it terrorized the defenders and destroyed some positions, but the thickest bunkers survived intact. Their German crews, deafened and shaken, stumbled back to their guns when the shelling lifted, and then the landing craft came. Across 5 beaches, Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno and Sword, 156,000 Allied troops stormed ashore, Americans at Utah and Omaha, British and Canadians at Gold, Juno and Sword. They came in waves, thousands of boats carrying men who waded through chest-deep water while German machine guns opened fire. At Omaha Beach, the carnage was apocalyptic. The preliminary bombardment had missed most of the German fortifications. The veteran 352nd Infantry Division held the high ground and poured fire down onto the beach. Men died before they could leave their landing craft. Others drowned in deep water, their equipment pulling them under. The beach became a killing ground, bodies and equipment scattered across the sand. But at Utah, Gold, Juno and Sword, the landings succeeded quickly. Casualties were heavy, but manageable. The German defenders, despite their concrete bunkers and interlocking fields of fire, could not stop 156,000 men supported by thousands of aircraft and naval guns. By nightfall on June 6th, the Allies controlled a foothold, 50 miles wide. They had lost approximately 10,300 men killed, wounded, or missing. A terrible price. But they were ashore, and they were not leaving. For the Germans, June 6th was a catastrophe of compounding failures. Rommel was in Germany. He did not learn of the invasion until late morning. He immediately began the long drive back to his headquarters at La Roche-Guyon, unable to fly because Allied aircraft controlled the skies. He would not arrive until evening, too late to influence the day's events. Hitler was asleep. His staff, terrified of waking him, delayed reporting the invasion. When Hitler finally woke around noon, he received the news with what witnesses described as almost cheerful confidence. The news couldn't be better, Hitler reportedly said. As long as they were in England, we couldn't get at them. Now we have them where we can destroy them. But Hitler refused to authorize the release of the Panzer reserves. He believed, or wanted to believe, that Normandy was a feint. The real invasion would come at Pas-de-Calais. The reserve panzer divisions had to be held back for the real threat. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. It was not until 4 o'clock in the afternoon, nearly 10 hours after the first troops landed, that Hitler finally authorized 2 panzer divisions, the 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend and Panzer Lehr, to move toward Normandy. By then, the window of opportunity had closed. In the early morning, when von Rundstedt had first requested authorization to move the panzers, the weather was overcast. Thick clouds blanketed northern France. German tanks could have moved without serious interference from Allied aircraft. They could have reached the beaches in daylight. They might have counterattacked while Allied forces were still disorganized. But by late afternoon, when Hitler finally gave his authorization, the clouds had broken up. Allied fighter-bombers, Thunderbolts and Typhoons and Mustangs ruled the skies. Any German unit that moved in daylight was systematically destroyed. Panzer Lehr began its approach to Normandy and was caught in the open by Allied aircraft. Rocket-firing typhoons destroyed tanks, trucks, fuel tankers. The division commander, General Fritz Bayerlein, had objected to moving in daylight. He had seen what Allied air power could do in North Africa. He was overruled. His division was decimated before it reached the battlefield. The 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich, stationed in southern France, began moving toward Normandy on June 7th. The journey should have taken 2 days. It took 2 weeks. French resistance fighters blew up bridges, cut rail lines, and ambushed supply columns. Allied aircraft destroyed anything that moved. Along the way, enraged by the constant harassment, SS troops committed atrocities, including the massacre of 642 civilians in the village of Oradour-sur-Glane. By the time Das Reich reached Normandy, the battle for the beaches was over. The Allies had won. Only one German armoured formation managed to launch a counterattack on June 6th. The 21st Panzer Division, stationed southeast of Caen, reacted quickly to the airborne landings. Its commander, General Edgar Feuchtinger, gathered his scattered units and moved north toward the British landing beaches. Around 4 in the afternoon, elements of the 21st Panzer broke through thinly held British positions and reached the coast between Sword and Juno beaches. For a few minutes, German tanks sat on the beach, their guns trained on the masses of Allied ships offshore. It was the closest the Germans came to throwing the invaders back into the sea. But the 21st Panzer was alone. No other units supported it. British reinforcements began arriving. Naval gunfire from offshore destroyers poured shells into the German positions. And overhead, the invasion armada was delivering another wave. Hundreds of gliders, towed by transport aircraft, released over the battlefield and began landing all around the German tanks. General Feuchtinger made the correct decision. He withdrew. Without infantry support, without air cover, without any prospect of reinforcement, his tanks were simply targets. By nightfall, the 21st Panzer had pulled back to defensive positions around Cayenne. That single counterattack was the entire German armoured response on D-Day. 1 division. Out of 10 Panzer divisions stationed in France, the mathematics explain everything. The Allies landed 156,000 troops in 24 hours. They did this using over 5,000 ships. They provided air cover with over 13,000 aircraft. They delivered overwhelming firepower through naval bombardment that German defenders described as apocalyptic. Against this, the Germans managed to commit 1 Panzer division and the static coastal defence troops already in position. No strategic reserves. No air cover, the Luftwaffe could muster only 300 sorties over Normandy on June 6th, and most of those planes never reached the battlefield. No naval support. Germany's surface fleet was non-existent in the Channel. The failure was not tactical. Individual German units fought with the skill and determination expected of Wehrmacht soldiers. The 352nd Infantry Division turned Omaha Beach into a slaughterhouse. The 21st Panzer executed a textbook counterattack. Dozens of bunkers held out for hours against overwhelming firepower. The failure was strategic, operational, and systemic. Germany's command structure was paralyzed by Hitler's insistence on personal control of operational decisions. The Führer had to authorize major troop movements, but the Führer was asleep or unavailable, or convinced the real invasion was coming elsewhere. Germany's intelligence had been deceived by one of history's most successful deception operations. Operation Fortitude had convinced Hitler and his staff that Pas-de-Calais was the invasion target. Fake armies, false radio traffic, double agents feeding disinformation to German intelligence. The deception was so successful that even after Normandy, Hitler held elite divisions at Calais for weeks, waiting for an invasion that never came. Germany's military had been hollowed out by years of attrition on the Eastern Front. The best divisions, the most experienced troops, the bulk of Germany's armour, all were fighting desperately to hold back Soviet offensives. The forces in France were a mixture of elite units recovering from the east, low-quality garrison troops, and Ost battalions, formations made up of Soviet prisoners of war with questionable loyalty, and critically, Germany had lost the air war. In his after-action report filed 2 weeks after the invasion, Field Marshal von Rundstedt listed 4 key factors that enabled Allied success. At the top of his list, above everything else, was complete mastery in the air. Allied air superiority meant German units could not move in daylight. It meant reconnaissance was impossible. It meant supply lines were constantly disrupted. It meant any concentration of forces would be spotted and destroyed before it could attack. Rommel had warned about this. Von Rundstedt had dismissed his concerns. On June 6th, Rommel was proved correct. The panzer divisions that von Rundstedt had kept in reserve could not reach the battlefield. Allied aircraft destroyed them on the roads. By the time Rommel returned to his headquarters on the evening of June 6th, the battle was effectively over. The Allies had established their beachhead. Over the following days and weeks, they would expand it. By the end of June, 850,000 Allied troops had landed in Normandy, along with 148,000 vehicles and 570,000 tons of supplies. The Germans could not match these numbers. Every division sent to Normandy had to travel hundreds of miles under constant air attack. Every ton of ammunition, every gallon of fuel, had to be transported along roads and rail lines that were systematically destroyed by Allied bombers. On June 17th, Rommel and von Rundstedt met with Hitler at Margival, north of Paris. Rommel, emboldened by desperation, told Hitler the truth. The invasion could not be stopped. German forces in Normandy were being ground down by Allied material superiority. The Luftwaffe could not contest the skies. The panzers could not maneuver under constant air attack. Germany was losing. Rommel suggested, carefully, that perhaps political solutions should be considered. Perhaps it was time to negotiate. Hitler exploded with rage. There would be no negotiations, no retreats. German forces would stand fast, fight to the last man, and wait for the miracle weapons, V-1 rockets and jet aircraft, that would turn the tide. The meeting ended with nothing resolved. On June 29th, Rommel and von Rundstedt met with Hitler again at Berchtesgaden. The situation in Normandy had deteriorated further. Both field marshals argued that the existing defensive line had become untenable. They needed to conduct a limited withdrawal, pull back to more defensible positions outside the range of Allied naval guns, reorganize, and then counterattack with concentrated force. Hitler refused, not one step back. After the meeting, von Rundstedt had a telephone conversation with Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel, Hitler's chief of staff. Keitel asked what should be done. Von Rundstedt's reply was blunt and suicidal. "Make peace, you idiots. What else can you do?" Within days, von Rundstedt was relieved of command. His replacement was Field Marshal Günther von Kluge, who arrived convinced that the situation could be salvaged through more aggressive tactics. Within weeks, von Kluge was sending the same messages von Rundstedt had sent. The situation was hopeless. Rommel lasted slightly longer. On July 17th, his staff car was strafed by Allied fighters. Rommel was severely wounded, his skull fractured. He would never return to active command. 3 days later, on July 20th, a bomb exploded in Hitler's headquarters in East Prussia. The assassination attempt failed, but Hitler's paranoia intensified. Rommel, through his association with some of the plotters, came under suspicion. On October 14th, he was given a choice: face trial for treason, which would mean execution and disgrace for his family, or commit suicide and be given a state funeral. Rommel took poison. Germany's greatest field commander died because he had told Hitler the truth. The war was lost. The Normandy campaign dragged on through the summer. KN, which the British had hoped to capture on D-Day, did not fall until late July. The bocage, the hedgerow country of Normandy, turned every field into a fortified position. German defenders, though outnumbered and outgunned, fought with desperate skill, but the mathematics were inexorable. Every German division destroyed in Normandy could not be replaced. Every tank knocked out, every gun captured, represented losses Germany could not afford. The Allies, by contrast, could replace their losses easily. More troops, more tanks, more supplies flooded ashore every day. On July 25th, American forces launched Operation Cobra, a massive offensive that broke through German lines near Saint-Lô. The breakthrough unleashed American armor into open country. Within weeks, German forces in Normandy were encircled in the Falaise pocket. 50,000 soldiers surrendered. An entire German army ceased to exist. Paris was liberated on August 25th. By September, Allied forces were on Germany's border. The Reich that Hitler had promised would last 1,000 years would survive less than a year more. The invasion that Hitler had believed he could stop on the beaches had succeeded beyond even the most optimistic Allied projections. And it had succeeded, fundamentally, because Germany's command structure was so dysfunctional that it could not respond effectively to a threat everyone knew was coming. The tragedy of June 6, 1944, from the German perspective, was that many of the mistakes were avoidable. If Rommel had been given control of all the panzer divisions and stationed them near likely invasion beaches, the Allies would have faced immediate counterattacks on D-Day. Would this have stopped the invasion? Probably not. Allied firepower was simply too overwhelming, but it might have made the cost prohibitive. It might have turned Normandy into a bloodbath that forced the Allies to reconsider their strategy. If Hitler had not insisted on personal control of operational reserves, von Rundstedt could have committed the panzers immediately on the morning of June 6th, while weather still protected them from Allied air attack. Those divisions might have reached the beaches in time to contest the landings. If German intelligence had not been so thoroughly deceived by Allied deception operations, Hitler might not have held elite divisions at Calais for weeks after Normandy. Those divisions, committed to the Normandy battle in the first week, could have made the difference between a contested beachhead and Allied breakthrough. But none of these things happened. Hitler insisted on control and delayed authorization. Von Rundstedt's reserves sat paralyzed while the invasion succeeded. Rommel's warnings about Allied air power were ignored until it was too late. The Atlantic Wall, that massive fortification system that had consumed millions of hours of labor and cubic meters of concrete, was breached in hours. The bunkers and obstacles and mines inflicted casualties. They made the invasion bloody. But they did not stop it, and in the final analysis, they could never have stopped it. Because the Atlantic Wall was not merely a physical structure, it was a symbol of a strategic failure Germany could never overcome. No amount of concrete could compensate for lost air superiority, for inadequate reserves, for a command structure paralyzed by one man's megalomaniacal insistence on personal control. 156,000 troops in 24 hours. That was the measure of Allied capability. That was the arithmetic that doomed the Third Reich. German generals looked at those numbers and understood. The war was over. Germany had lost. Not in some future battle, but right here, on June 6, 1944, when Allied troops stormed ashore and Germany could not stop them. Everything after D-Day was just the slow, terrible process of making that reality undeniable. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe. At 8:23 on the morning of March 14, 1943, Staff Sergeant Raymond Chen stood in the bomb bay of a B-17 flying fortress at Molesworth Air Base in England, holding a bomb sight that had just cost 3 American lives, the Norden Mark 15, serial number 73421, 47 pounds of brass, aluminum, and broken promises. The mission brief said it would put a bomb in a pickle barrel from 20,000 feet. The after-action report told a different story. Yesterday's target was a ball-bearing factory in Schweinfurt, a building 200 feet wide. 18 bombers from the 303rd Bomb Group dropped 108 500-pound bombs. 12 hit within half a mile of the target. 96 landed somewhere in Germany. 3 B-17s didn't come home. The bombardiers had done everything right, followed every procedure, trusted the most expensive, most secret piece of equipment in the American arsenal, and it had failed them. Chen pulled the bomb sight from its storage case. His hands were cold. The unheated hangar was barely above freezing. He'd been a bomb sight mechanic for 11 months, trained at Lowry Field in Denver, top of his class. He could disassemble a Norden in 47 minutes, could balance a gyroscope rotor to within 0.01 grams, could recalibrate the mechanical computer blindfolded. He knew this machine better than anyone on the base, and he knew it was killing people. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The problem wasn't new. It had been there from the beginning, 1931. Carl Norden delivered his masterpiece to the Navy, a tachometric bomb sight with gyroscopic stabilization, an analog computer that calculated bomb trajectories in real time, an autopilot interface that let the bombardier fly the aircraft. Revolutionary. The testing was flawless. At Dahlgren Proving Ground in Virginia, Navy bombardiers consistently hit targets from altitude with a circular error probable of 75 feet. 75 feet, from 20,000 feet up, moving at 200 miles per hour. It was precision that had never existed before. The military planners were ecstatic. This was the weapon that would win the war. Daylight precision bombing. No need for the British tactic of carpet bombing entire cities at night. American bombers would fly high, fast, and accurate. They would hit specific factories, specific rail yards, specific power plants, surgical strikes that would cripple Germany's war machine without wasting bombs on civilian areas. The theory was beautiful. The Norden would make it possible. Except it didn't. By March 1943, 16 months into American bombing operations over Europe, the statistics were undeniable. The 8th Air Force, flying from England, was averaging an error of 1,673 feet, not 75 feet, 1,673 feet, more than a third of a mile. Bombs meant for a factory fell on farms 2 miles away. Bombs aimed at rail yards landed in rivers. Half of all bombs dropped fell more than 1,000 feet from their intended targets. The doctrine required precision. The bomb sight delivered scatter. And American bomber crews were dying for it, not just from German fighters and flak, but from the missions themselves. When your bomb sight can't hit the target, you fly more missions. More missions mean more exposure. More exposure means more losses. The math was brutal. Chen had watched 53 bombers take off from Molesworth since January. 14 hadn't returned. 7 were shot down by fighters, 4 by flak. 3 simply disappeared, never seen again. The crews called them operational losses. acceptable casualties in the pursuit of strategic objectives. But Chen knew better. These men weren't dying because German defenses were too strong. They were dying because American technology wasn't good enough. The briefing rooms said the bomb site was perfect. The maintenance manuals said any errors were operator failure. The training films said proper use guaranteed accuracy. But Chen had the actual combat reports. He'd read dozens of them. Bombardiers describing identical problems. The site would track perfectly during the approach. The crosshairs would settle on target. The mechanical computer would calculate the release point. Then, in the final 30 seconds of the bomb run, the crosshairs would drift. Not much, maybe half a degree. But at 20,000 feet, half a degree was 500 feet of error. The bombs would fall wide. The target would survive. The mission would fail. The official explanation was wind calculation error. The bombardier wasn't accounting for crosswind properly. But Chen knew that was wrong. These were trained men. They knew how to calculate wind. They knew how to use the site. The problem wasn't the operators. The problem was the machine. And nobody wanted to admit it. The Norden bomb site cost $11,000 per unit. The government had spent over $100 million on production facilities. The entire strategic bombing doctrine depended on it working. Admitting the site had a fundamental flaw would mean admitting the whole bombing campaign was built on faulty assumptions. So they blamed the bombardiers, retrained them, sent them back up, watched them die. Chen opened the access panel on the bomb site's stabilization platform. Inside were two gyroscopes. The vertical gyro maintained level reference. The azimuth gyro maintained directional reference. Both spun at 7,800 revolutions per minute. Both were mounted in precision gimbals. Both were supposed to remain stable regardless of aircraft movement. They didn't. Chen knew this because he'd tested it. Not officially. The official testing happened at depot-level maintenance facilities. Field mechanics like Chen were supposed to perform routine calibration and replace damaged parts. They weren't supposed to conduct independent testing. They weren't supposed to question the design. But Chen had done both. 3 weeks ago, he'd mounted a bomb sight on a test stand in the maintenance hangar, a simple wooden frame that held the sight at the correct angle. He'd powered it up, let the gyros spin to full speed, then checked the reference accuracy using spirit levels. Perfect. The sight indicated level to within 0.05 degrees. Then he'd started introducing vibration. First, gentle, then moderate, then heavy. The kind of vibration a B-17 experiences at altitude. 4 Wright Cyclone engines running at 2,300 RPM, airframe flexing in turbulence, gun turrets rotating, bomb bay doors opening, real-world conditions, and the gyroscopes drifted. Not immediately. The first 5 minutes were stable. Then, slowly, the vertical reference started tilting. 0.1 degrees, 0.2, 0.3. After 15 minutes of continuous vibration, the sight was off by nearly 1 full degree. At 20,000 feet, 1 degree of error meant 2,000 feet of misdistance. That explained everything. The bombardiers weren't making mistakes. The bomb sight was failing mid-mission. The long approach to target, 20 to 30 minutes of flight in formation, constant engine vibration, continuous turbulence. By the time they reached the release point, the gyroscopes had drifted far enough to make accurate bombing impossible. Chen had written a report, documented the test procedure, included measurements, explained the mechanism. He'd submitted it to his commanding officer, Captain Wallace, the engineering officer for the 303rd Bomb Group. Wallace had read it, asked Chen 3 questions, then told him to destroy the report and never speak of it again. The problem, Wallace explained, wasn't technical, it was political. The Norden bomb site was classified top secret. Its performance was classified. Its problems were classified. Field mechanics didn't have clearance to analyze design flaws. That authority belonged to the Norden Company, the Navy Bureau of Ordnance, and depot-level engineering teams. If Chen's findings were correct, which Wallace didn't doubt, then the proper channels would eventually identify and address the issue. Eventually, probably by 1945, maybe 1946. Until then, Chen was to maintain the bomb sites according to the manual and keep his mouth shut. Chen had tried. For 3 weeks, he'd done exactly what Wallace ordered, performed routine maintenance, replaced worn parts, calibrated the sights to specification, watched bombers take off, watched some come back, watched their crews describe the same drifting crosshairs, the same frustrating misses, the same futile missions. Then, yesterday happened. The Schweinfurt mission. Lieutenant James Hastings was the lead bombardier, 24 years old. From Minnesota, 41 combat missions. Chen had maintained Hastings' bomb site personally, had recalibrated it 2 days before the mission. Perfect alignment. Zero drift on the test stand. Hastings knew the Norden better than most. He'd been flying combat since November 1942. He'd learned to compensate for the site's quirks, adjust his approach timing, account for expected drift, make his best guess, and hope. The mission brief called for a precision strike on Factory Building No. 3, the main bearing assembly hall. Intelligence said destroying that building would cut German ball bearing production by 40%. 18 bombers, 108 bombs, 1 target. Hastings led the formation through moderate flak. 2 fighters made passes but were driven off. The weather was clear, visibility unlimited, perfect conditions. At 14,000 feet, Hastings activated the bomb site. The gyros spun up. He dialed in altitude, airspeed, wind estimate. The mechanical computer began calculating. Hastings located the target through the telescope, a dark rectangular building among lighter factory structures. He rotated the sight to align the vertical crosshair, clutched in the autopilot. The B-17 responded, turning slightly to match the bomb site's heading. The approach was textbook, the formation held tight, the crosshairs settled on target. The mechanical computer calculated the release angle. Everything was perfect. Except the crosshairs were drifting. Hastings saw it happening. The vertical reference was tilting. Slowly, inexorably, the crosshairs slid left across the target. He tried to compensate, rotated the sight right, but the drift continued. The gyroscope was failing. At the release point, the crosshairs were 3 degrees off-center. Hastings knew what that meant. Half a mile of error. The bombs would miss, but there was no time to adjust, no time to abort. The computer had calculated the release. The bombs fell. 108 500-pound bombs. 12 hit the factory complex. 4 landed in the target building. 96 fell in residential areas. Civilian casualties, 372. Military casualties, 89. Target damage, minimal. Mission result, failure. 3 B-17s were shot down during the withdrawal. One of them was Hastings's. German fighters caught them over France. The bomber went down near Reims. No survivors. Chen heard about it from the intelligence officer that evening. Hastings and his crew were dead. The mission had failed. And Chen knew why. The gyroscopes, the vibration, the drift, the same problem he'd documented 3 weeks ago. The same problem Captain Wallace had told him to ignore. That night, Chen went back to the maintenance hangar. Alone, the Norden from Hastings' aircraft had been recovered from the crash site. Damaged, but intact. Chen pulled it from storage, opened the access panels, removed the gyroscopes. Under close inspection, he found what he expected. Bearing damage, not catastrophic, just enough to introduce friction. The friction created heat. The heat caused expansion. The expansion created more friction. A feedback loop that progressively degraded gyroscope performance during flight. The bearings were supposed to be precision ground to within 0.0001 inches. Zero play. Perfect rotation. But these bearings had play. Chen could feel it with his fingertips. 0.005 inches. Tiny. Imperceptible in normal handling. Deadly in combat. He examined the other bomb sites in his maintenance inventory. 14 units, all recently calibrated, all certified operational. He checked the gyroscope bearings on each one. 13 had measurable play, some worse than others, but all degraded. The problem wasn't unique to Hastings' site. It was systemic. Every bomb site that came through, combat missions experienced bearing wear. The constant vibration, the temperature extremes, the high-G maneuvers during evasive action, all of it wore down the bearings, created friction, induced drift. The depot maintenance schedules called for bearing replacement every 6 months, but the war didn't operate on depot schedules. Bombers flew missions weekly, sometimes daily. The bomb sites didn't get sent back for overhaul until they failed catastrophically. By then, crews were already dead. Chen sat in the cold hangar and stared at the disassembled bomb site. 47 pounds of expensive machinery, 2,000 individual parts, weeks of precision manufacturing, and it all came down to bearings, tiny steel balls in tiny metal races, wearing out, killing people. The solution was obvious: replace the bearings more frequently, but Chen didn't have authorization to do that. Bearing replacement required depot-level maintenance, required special tools, required parts that Chen didn't have access to. The supply system was designed for routine maintenance, not battlefield repairs. He needed a different solution, something he could implement in the field, something that didn't require authorization, something simple. Chen thought about Hastings, about the mission, about the gyroscope drift, about vibration. The bearing wear couldn't be prevented, not without redesigning the entire mount system, but maybe the effects could be reduced. If the gyroscopes experienced less vibration, the bearings would wear slower, the drift would be less pronounced, the accuracy would improve. The question was how to reduce vibration in a machine specifically designed to be vibration-resistant. The Norden's gyroscopes were already gimbal-mounted. They were already isolated from direct airframe movement. But they weren't isolated from vibration. The whole bomb site transmitted engine vibration through its mounting structure. That's what Chen had observed in his tests. Constant, high-frequency oscillation, not enough to be visible, but enough to affect bearing surfaces at 7,800 RPM. Then Chen remembered something. The Sperry bomb site, the competing design that the army had briefly considered before settling on the Norden. Chen had never worked on a Sperry, but he'd read the technical documentation during his training. The Sperry had one feature the Norden lacked: shock absorption mounts, rubber isolators that damped vibration between the bomb site and the aircraft structure. Norden had rejected shock mounts in his design, claimed they introduced positional uncertainty, made the site less stable during maneuvering. But what if Norden was wrong? What if the gyroscope drift from bearing wear was worse than any positional uncertainty from shock mounts? Chen didn't have Sperry shock mounts, but he had rubber. Every aircraft on base used rubber grommets in various installations: engine mounts, control linkages, instrument panels, standard, quarter-inch grommets, simple rubber rings with metal sleeves. Chen looked at the Norden's base mounting plate. 4 bolt holes, currently using standard steel bolts with lock washers, metal on metal, perfect transmission of vibration. What if he replaced those bolts with isolated mounts, rubber grommets between the bomb site base and the aircraft structure? It wouldn't be perfect isolation, but it might be enough to reduce vibration, enough to extend bearing life, enough to prevent the drift that was killing bombardiers. It would violate every regulation in the maintenance manual. Unauthorized modification of classified equipment, use of non-specified components, alteration of precision instruments without engineering approval, court-martial offense, possibly treason given the bomb site's classification level. But Hastings was dead, and tomorrow more bombers would take off. More bombardiers would trust their Nordens, more missions would fail, more crews would die. Chen made his decision. He found 8 rubber grommets in the parts storage, standard AN 815 specification, used for instrument panel mounting, quarter-inch inner diameter, half-inch outer diameter, 3/16 inch thick. He modified 4 of the Norden base mounting bolts, drilled out the bolt holes slightly, installed the grommets as isolators. The bomb sight still mounted securely. The bolts still torqued to specification. But now there was a thin layer of rubber between the sight and the aircraft structure. Chen carried the modified bomb sight to the test stand, powered it up, let the gyros stabilize, then activated his vibration source, a small electric motor with an unbalanced weight, same frequency as a B-17's engines. He ran it for 30 minutes, checked the gyroscope reference. 0.03 degrees drift. Not 0, but 3 times better than before. With standard mounting, he'd measured 0.1 degrees after 15 minutes. With the rubber isolation, 0.03 after 30 minutes. Twice the time, 1/3 the drift. Math that could save lives. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Chen didn't ask permission. He knew what the answer would be. At 0430 on March 15th, 1943, he walked onto the flight line with his modified bomb sight. The pre-flight crews were fueling bombers for the morning mission. Target: submarine pens at Saint-Nazaire, France. 16 B-17s from the 303rd. Chen's assigned aircraft was serial number 4230768, the Memphis Belle. Pilot, Captain Robert Morgan. Bombardier, Lieutenant Vincent Evans. Chen had worked with Evans for 7 months. Evans was careful, methodical. He trusted his equipment but verified everything. If the modification worked, Evans would notice. If it failed, Evans would report it. Chen climbed through the nose hatch. The Bombardier's compartment was cramped. Plexiglass nose cone. The bomb sight mounting position center forward. Storage compartment to the left. Chen removed the standard Norden from its case. Installed it in the mount. Torqued the bolts. The rubber grommets compressed slightly. Not enough to notice visually, but enough to isolate vibration. He signed the maintenance log. Equipment installed. Operational status confirmed. No mention of modifications. No documentation of the change. If Evans died because the modification failed, there would be no paper trail. Just Chen's knowledge that he'd killed a man by breaking regulations. The bombers took off at 0615. Chen watched from the maintenance area. 16 aircraft, 160 men. Evans was in the lead ship. His bomb sight was the one that would guide the formation. If his aim was off, all 16 bombers would miss. Chen couldn't watch the mission. No radio contact during flight, no telemetry. Just waiting. The bombers were due back at 1100 hours, 5 hours of not knowing. Chen tried to work, performed routine maintenance on other aircraft, checked engine oil levels, inspected landing gear. His hands moved through familiar procedures while his mind calculated probabilities. The Saint-Nazaire pens were reinforced concrete, 15 feet thick, designed to withstand direct hits. The only vulnerable point was the construction area, an open section where new pens were being built. Intelligence estimated it at 150 feet wide. From 22,000 feet, with standard Norden drift, hitting a 150-foot target was nearly impossible. But if the rubber isolation reduced drift by 2/3, maybe Evans had a chance. At 10:47, the first bomber appeared, then another. The formation was smaller, 13 aircraft. 3 missing. Chen counted them as they landed. The Memphis Belle touched down at 10:53. Evans climbed out 15 minutes later. He walked directly to Chen. Evans' face was unreadable. Combat missions did that. Turned expressions blank, hid emotion behind professional detachment. But Evans's eyes were different. There was something there. Confusion. Maybe disbelief. "Sergeant Chen," Evans said, "what did you do to my bomb sight?" Chen's stomach dropped. The modification had failed. Evans had missed, maybe gotten his crew killed. "Sir, I performed standard maintenance, calibrated to specification. Sergeant, I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm asking what you did differently. Chen hesitated, admitting the modification meant court-martial, but lying to an officer was worse. I installed vibration isolation mounts, sir. Rubber grommets between the base plate and the aircraft structure. Unauthorized modification. I take full responsibility. Evans stared at him for 5 seconds. Then he did something unexpected. He smiled. That bomb sight, Evans said, is the best I've ever flown with. 0. Drift. 0. I tracked the target for 6 minutes. Dead stable. Crosshairs never moved. We put 8 bombs in a 100-foot circle. First time in 41 missions I've done that. Chen didn't know what to say. Evans continued. I thought maybe it was just good conditions. Light turbulence, smooth engines, but my navigator checked. We had moderate chop the entire approach. The engines were running rough. Number 3 was throwing oil. By rights, that bomb sight should have been drifting all over the place, but it didn't. It held like it was welded to the ground. The rubber isolation dampens engine vibration, sir, reduces bearing friction in the gyroscopes, prevents heat buildup, minimizes drift. Evans nodded slowly. How many other bomb sites have you modified? Just yours, sir. Can you modify mine permanently and do the same to every other site in the squadron? Sir, I don't have authorization. Screw authorization, Sergeant. I just hit a target I thought was impossible. If you can do that for every bombardier in this group, I'll personally write the recommendation for your Medal of Honor, or your court-martial, whichever comes first. Chen modified 6 more bomb sites that week. Evans spread the word quietly, told other bombardiers about his St. Nazaire mission, described the stability, the accuracy, the confidence of knowing the site would hold steady. The bombardiers came to Chen, privately, after duty hours, asked if he could do the same modification to their sites. Chen worked at night, the maintenance hangar after 2,200 hours, rubber grommets, modified mounting bolts, 30 minutes per bomb site, each one an unauthorized modification, each one a potential court-martial. But the results spoke for themselves. The next week, the 303rd flew 4 missions, 23 sorties total, 16 bombers with modified sights, 7 with standard mounts. The modified sights achieved an average error of 340 feet. The standard sights averaged 1,200 feet, 3.5 times better accuracy. The bombardiers noticed. More importantly, they talked. At the officers' club, in the briefing rooms, on the flight line. Word spread to other squadrons. The 306th, the 3058th, the 364th. Bombardiers from other groups heard about Chen's modification. They wanted it too. By April, Chen had modified 42 bomb sites. Other maintenance crews started asking questions. How was Chen achieving better accuracy? What was he doing differently? Chen showed them, explained the vibration theory, demonstrated the bearing friction problem, taught them how to install the grommets. The modification spread, not through official channels, not through engineering bulletins or technical orders, through mechanics. Sergeant to sergeant, one bomber group to another. Field maintenance crews sharing solutions because the official system wasn't providing them. Captain Wallace noticed in late April. The 303rd's bombing accuracy had improved dramatically. Mission success rates were up, aircraft losses were down. Crews were hitting targets they'd missed for months. Wallace was pleased until he ran a routine inspection and found Chen's modified bomb sites. Wallace pulled Chen into his office, closed the door. His face was carefully neutral. Sergeant Chen, I specifically ordered you to stop investigating the bomb site drift problem. Yes, sir, I stopped investigating. I started fixing it instead. That's not funny, Sergeant. Do you understand what you've done? Unauthorized modification of classified equipment, use of non-approved components, alteration of precision instruments without engineering clearance. This is a court-martial offence, possibly multiple offences. Yes, sir, I understand. Then why did you do it? Because it works, sir. Because our bombardiers are hitting targets. Because fewer bombers are getting shot down making multiple runs. Because the modification saves lives. Wallace sat back in his chair, rubbed his face with both hands. Show me the test data. Chen showed him the vibration measurements, the bearing friction analysis, the drift calculations, the combat results from 42 modified bomb sites over 6 weeks. Wallace read everything, asked technical questions, checked Chen's math. Finally, he looked up. This is solid work, Sergeant. Better than most engineering reports I've seen from depot maintenance. The problem is, you did it without authorization. I can't officially approve this. The chain of command doesn't work that way. I understand, sir. But I can't order you to remove the modifications either. Not when they're demonstrably improving mission effectiveness. Wallace leaned forward. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to write a report describing the accuracy improvements we've observed. I'm going to send it up through channels to 8th Air Force, Engineering Command. I'm going to recommend they conduct formal testing of vibration isolation systems for the Norden bomb site. I am not going to mention your name. I am not going to mention that field modifications have already been implemented. Sir, let me finish. You are going to continue performing standard maintenance. You are going to calibrate bomb sites according to the manual. You are not going to document any modifications. If anyone asks, you performed routine maintenance, and the accuracy improvements are due to better pilot training and favorable weather conditions. Is that clear? Yes, sir. Good. Dismissed. Chen left Wallace's office, knowing the situation was fragile. The modifications were working, but they existed in a grey area between battlefield necessity and military regulation. As long as nobody looked too closely, Chen could continue. But eventually, someone would notice. Someone higher up the chain. Someone who cared more about regulations than results. That someone arrived in May. Colonel Herbert Thompson, 8th Air Force Inspector General's office. He came to Molesworth on a routine compliance inspection, examined maintenance logs, reviewed procedures, interviewed mechanics. Thompson was methodical, by the book. He'd spent 20 years in the army, believed in regulations, trusted the system. When he found discrepancies between documented procedures and actual practice, he investigated. Thompson noticed the accuracy improvements, saw the mission reports, 3 months of consistently better bombing results. He asked why. Captain Wallace gave him the prepared answer. Better training, more experience, improved tactics. Thompson didn't believe it. He'd seen enough bombing data to know that accuracy doesn't improve 50% in 3 months through training alone. Something else was happening. Thompson went to the flight line, examined bomb sites personally. On his third inspection, he found the rubber grommets. He removed the mounting bolts, saw the modifications, traced the isolation system, understood what had been done. He called Wallace to his temporary office. Captain, your bombardiers are using modified equipment, non-standard mounting systems, unauthorized components. These modifications are not documented in any technical orders or engineering bulletins I can find. Wallace kept his expression neutral. Colonel, I'm not aware of any unauthorized modifications. My maintenance crews follow standard procedures. Captain, I have a modified bomb site in the next room. Rubber isolation mounts that don't appear in any Norden technical manual. Either your crews are freelancing modifications without your knowledge, or you're lying to me. Which is it? Wallace chose his words carefully. Colonel, field maintenance crews sometimes adapt procedures to local conditions, environmental factors, operational requirements. As long as the equipment meets performance specifications, I consider that acceptable. Adaptation rather than unauthorized modification. That's a creative interpretation of regulations, Captain. It's an interpretation that puts bombs on target, Colonel. Thompson studied Wallace. Show me the performance data. Wallace showed him. 6 months of mission reports, before and after the modifications began. The numbers were undeniable. Average error had dropped from 1,600 feet to 420 feet, almost 4 times better. Mission success rates had doubled. Aircraft losses per successful strike had decreased by 40%. Thompson reviewed the data silently. Finally, he spoke. This modification improves performance significantly, but it's still unauthorized. I should be recommending disciplinary action against you and everyone involved. Yes, sir, you should. But if I do that, the modifications stop. Accuracy drops. More missions fail. More crews die. And I become the Inspector General who made American bombing less effective by enforcing regulations. Thompson closed the folder. I'm going to pretend I didn't see this. I'm going to write a report recommending formal engineering evaluation of vibration isolation systems for precision bomb sites. I'm going to suggest that 8th Air Force Engineering Command conduct field testing of various isolation designs, and I'm going to forget which base I was at when I made this recommendation. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me, Captain. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it because the data is too good to ignore. But understand this. If your modifications cause a single accident, if a single bomb site fails catastrophically and kills a crew, I will personally ensure that everyone involved faces court-martial. Are we clear? Crystal clear, sir. Thompson left Molesworth the next day. His report went to 8th Air Force Headquarters, then to Army Air Force Engineering Command, then to the Naval Bureau of Ordnance, which still controlled Northern procurement. The bureaucracy moved slowly. Committees were formed, studies were authorized, test protocols were written. While the military debated whether to officially test vibration isolation, field mechanics kept installing it. By June 1943, over 300 bomb sites in the 8th Air Force had rubber isolation mounts. The modifications were still unofficial, still undocumented, still technically illegal, but they were everywhere. The 15th Air Force in Italy heard about it. Their mechanics started doing the same modifications. The Pacific Theatre heard. B-29s with Norden sights got rubber mounts. Nobody called it a field modification. Nobody wrote technical bulletins. It was just something mechanics did, a known fix for a known problem, passed from base to base, sergeant to sergeant. The official testing finally happened in August. Army Air Force Engineering Command at Wright Field, Ohio. They tested 3 isolation designs: rubber grommets, spring mounts, hydraulic dampeners. The rubber grommets performed best, simple, cheap, effective. The test report recommended immediate, fleet-wide implementation. In September, the Naval Bureau of Ordnance issued Technical Bulletin 043, Vibration Isolation Mounting for Mark 15 Bomb Site. The bulletin described a new mounting system using rubber grommets, specified AN815 grommets, 1/4 inch inner diameter, 1/2 inch outer diameter, 3/16 thick, identical to what Chen had installed 6 months earlier. The bulletin didn't mention Chen, didn't acknowledge field modifications, credited the improvement to engineering analysis and formal testing. The Norden Company received a contract to manufacture mounting kits, 50,000 units. Each kit cost $12 to produce. The company charged the government $47 per kit. By December 1943, the vibration isolation mounting was standard on all Norden bomb sites. New production, aircraft came with it installed. Older aircraft were retrofitted during depot maintenance. The military's official position was that the improvement came from proper engineering channels. The field mechanics knew better. Chen never received recognition, no commendation, no medal, no mention in official records. Captain Wallace wrote a letter of recommendation for his personnel file, standard language, performed maintenance duties in accordance with regulations. Nothing about the modification, nothing about the improvement, nothing about the thousands of bombs that hit their targets because Chen had violated regulations to fix a problem nobody wanted to admit existed. The accuracy statistics told the real story. In July 1943, before fleet-wide implementation. 8th Air Force average error was 1,100 feet. By January 1944, after implementation, average error was 350 feet, better than 3 times improvement. Mission. Success rates doubled. Fewer bombers were lost to repeated attacks on missed targets. By the end of the war, the Norden bombsight with vibration isolation was achieving combat accuracy close to its tested performance. Not 75 feet, but 400 feet, still not perfect, but good enough to hit factories, rail yards, oil refineries, good enough to win. The irony was that the solution had always been simple: 8 rubber grommets, $12 worth of parts, 30 minutes of installation time. But it took a staff sergeant violating regulations, risking court-martial, and ignoring the chain of command to implement it. The military eventually caught up, issued the bulletin, manufactured the kits, took credit for the improvement. By then, Chen was already fixing the next problem. Every bomber had issues. The official system was too slow to address them, but the field mechanics weren't. They shared solutions, adapted procedures, fixed problems the engineers didn't even know existed. They kept the bombers flying, kept the crews alive, and they never asked permission. Chen survived the war, returned to California in 1945, went to college on the GI Bill, became an engineer, worked for Boeing, designed aircraft components. Officially, with proper authorization. But he never forgot the lesson from Molesworth. Sometimes the right solution requires breaking the rules. Sometimes regulations exist to protect bureaucracy rather than accomplish missions. Sometimes a staff sergeant with rubber grommets can do what a $100 million program cannot: fix the actual problem. The Norden bombsight is remembered as one of World War II's most important technologies. Museums display it behind glass. Historians credit it with enabling precision bombing. Technical documents describe its sophisticated gyroscopes, its mechanical computer, its autopilot interface. They rarely mention the rubber grommets, but the bombardiers remembered, the men who flew combat missions, who trusted the sight to guide their bombs, who came home because their targets were actually destroyed instead of requiring repeated missions. They knew the Norden didn't work properly until someone fixed it. Someone who wasn't supposed to. Someone who did it anyway. In 1978, the Smithsonian Institution acquired a Norden bombsight for their World War II exhibit, serial number 73421. The same site Chen had held in March 1943, the same site that had cost 3 American lives before Chen modified it. The museum conservators prepared it for display, cleaned it, documented it, photographed every detail. They noticed the rubber grommets in the mounting system, noted them as standard vibration isolation mounts, introduced mid-1943. They didn't know those grommets represented thousands of unauthorized field modifications, didn't know a staff sergeant had risked court-martial to install. To them. Didn't know the official story was incomplete. The bombsight sat in the museum for 40 years, behind glass, under lights, a symbol of American technological superiority. A reminder that precision bombing won the war. But the real story wasn't about technology. It was about a mechanic who knew the equipment was failing, who understood the problem, who found a solution, and who implemented it despite regulations, despite orders, despite the risk. Because sometimes saving lives matters more than following rules. Sometimes a sergeant knows better than a general. Sometimes the fix costs $12. And nobody wants to admit they spent $100 million before finding it. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.